Mike, shall we?
Sure thing. So welcome everybody. We're waiting for the last couple to get in and be let in. We can just remind everybody that the class still needs our support. If you haven't joined the class, even though we're not doing minor regattas, it's probably times like this we need it the most. So please join the class. So our presenters tonight are Paul. Say hi, Paul.
Hey everyone, welcome.
And myself and Mike Marshall. And you know, for those of you that don't know Mike, he's been sailing Thistles in Newport, and he's also been crewing at Midwinters and things like that for Pat O'Connor a bit. And he's also our sail designer, so we thought we'd have him on board as well for this.
Welcome.
Say hi, Mike.
Hey guys.
All right. We wanted to start off with sort of the basics of thistle sailing, and you know, my opinion of thistle sailing is it's a round bottom dinghy, and any round bottom dinghy has to be sailed pretty flat. And what does flat mean? I thought would be a really good discussion, because flat isn't always literally flat. It was interesting. It was down winter, right on the was there with the, you know, people could donate things and then you buy them for a couple bucks and you donate it to the junior sailing program, was the sailing book. And I just picked it up and I flipped open, and there was an article by Sandy Douglas about the Thistle. And he had won a couple national champions at that point. He designed the boat, of course. So I thought it'd be really interesting to read his article. And one of the first things he said is you got to sail the boat pretty heeled up, and it's like 15 degrees or more to get nice pressure on the helm. And you know, things change. We've kind of learned since that that doesn't work so well, but I just thought that was a really interesting starting point of discussion on this whole thing, was how much heel is correct. And so Paul, what do you kind of think of, you know, kind of flat water? What are you really looking for?
Well, you know, I've obviously learned from a lot of great sailors and watching them, but you know, I feel like I want to feel the boat in the helm, and if the helm's got a tug on it, if the boat's heeling and the helm has any weather helm, that's drag. And so I want to sail the boat with as neutral a helm as possible. And sometimes that's in the Thistle and in other boats, it's uncomfortably flat to make that happen. So I'll, you know, really let the tiller tell me what the boat needs.
Yeah, so I agree. So this is in California at Midwinters West in the bay there, really, really flat water. And I remember sailing just super flat and having almost no helm. And I thought that was really fast. I think when it's flat water, I mean, I think flat really is flat. I think it's 0 degrees of heel is correct. Mm-hmm. And I think the feedback on that is pretty much neutral helm. And I don't think, you know, that the rake has a huge effect on that. The heel makes a much bigger effect than the rake. So even if your rake's a little different, flat for the most part is going to be 0 degrees of heel, is going to be, you know, 0 helm as well.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think it's a little different in waves. So this is Midwinters East this year. This is the finish, and there's a couple interesting things about this photo I want to talk about. This is us sailing there. So what are your thoughts on heel and waves, Paul?
It was much windier there, and you couldn't pinch. So in order to get the boat flat, we have to ease the sails, hike like mad, depower the boat. But you know, sometimes we have to ease the sails to keep the boat flat, because I think the foils is the most important thing to make the boat go, especially through chop.
Yeah, so you know, you notice this is the main's out pretty crazy far, right? So I mean that's a huge, you know, huge distance. Yeah, I mean look at this boom here, right? And from the end of the boom to the transom here, this is a long distance, right?
Yeah.
You know, like this whole area, and so it's way over the corner of the transom. You know, I'm guessing that they caught us. This is at the finish. I'm guessing they caught us, you know, at a big wave or something. I just eased out the main. I don't think I was sailing around with it that far out, but I'm pretty sure I was kind of hovering over the corner of the boat most of the time.
Right.
And
well, it would help if Dan hiked.
Yeah, if Dan hiked a little, that could have helped a little bit too. But you know, I thought that was kind of an interesting photo, how different this is compared to flat water. So
Mike, when you look at that photo, you know, you guys seem to be easing the jib quite a bit there as well. What are you keying into there?
Yeah, so once you ease the main that much, you're just going to close off the slot. You know, the jib and the main, of course, overlap. So when you ease out the main, it goes from, you know, I don't know what the distance is, maybe a foot or so of gap, and you can cut that in half pretty quick when you're eased this much. So when I ease out the main a bunch, Dan's playing the jib, you know, not as much as the main, definitely playing it though. Like, so what are you looking for on how much to ease the jib, Paul?
It's, you know, the good communication. If I'm going to hit a set of waves or drive around a set of waves, and that may have been what you were doing here, is, you know, if you look to where Mariana's shoulder is about to touch, you may have been trying to get around a set of waves at that point in time. So you have to ease both sails to keep that slot open.
Yeah. I use a couple keys for that. You know, the first is you just know you're easing the main. So I say, you know, crack the jib, and then Dan gets more and more in tune with that as we do it more and more. As, you know, he sees a big set of waves, or Mariana calls a big set of waves, and we both know that, you know, we're going to have to ease both sails.
Mm-hmm.
So what I need to do is, you know, to ease it out ahead of time you can, but, you know, I think in the end that there's sort of some really big indicators. So when you ease the main, if the main backwinds, then the jib's too tight. You know, I want a little bubble, and that tells you how much you should ease the jib. If there's no bubble, it's too loose. If there's a lot of bubble or even flogging, it's too tight.
Way too tight.
And
anything to add to that, Paul?
No, I think they hit it.
And I've got one question from the chat here, is that, you know, in this photo, you haven't eased your traveler down at all. Is that a control that you use very much?
I don't. You know, I've kind of always been the traveler in the center kind of guy. It's
you got it down a little bit there, Mike.
Yeah, I was going to say, I do think it's down just a tiny bit, but, you know, you're right. It's not down like it is. You know, I think this is probably the center right here. You know, it's just down a car width or two, a couple car widths.
I know at midwinters, Mike, I sailed with the traveler down to the bottom of the tiller hole, you know, and one set of waves, I think, if I remember, it was asymmetric actually, because on one tack I needed it down, and the other tack I didn't, with the wave angle.
You know, I'm mostly vang sheeting. I pull the vang on super tight, let it out. I want the ability to come in. You know, and I do just remember too that the proctor main's different. You sail it very differently. You'd let the trab down. You play the traveler and pull the main sheet super tight. So, but good observation on the jib, and good question on that traveler down. Just don't put it down much. I know a whole bunch of people are just, you know, my son Sam, he's center. He just has an eye bolt in the center because we use it so little. It's also really handy to have a traveler, so you can, when you go trailing, you can stick that little mast fitting in there to put the mast on. So.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So, you know, so this is sort of in between, right? This is a pretty windy day. This is Eugene, Oregon, Nationals out there. And, you know, I think there's a whole bunch of things here we could talk about, but what I wanted to focus on here is, you know, this was as flat as I want to sail it, partly because Delia's drooping there and she'd go in the water. And I think I sailed a little flatter when she straight legs. So she would switch between drooping and straight legging. But I never got completely flat. But I think when it's flatter like this, you can, but the water's flatter, you can, you know, take a look at the front of my jib. It's definitely soft, meaning I'm feathering. So I can feather it up to keep it flat, and then clearly the main's not out nearly as far as it was in the Midwinter's West pitch east there when I was going through big waves.
And you're very, lots of vang in this picture, Mike. Very flat, lots of outhaul as well. Yeah,
we got a close-up of this in a couple of slides. We're going to talk about some of the controls in a little bit, but the, you know, my thoughts here are that, you know, just remember that there's sort of three extremes. If you go back to the three photos here, we got kind of, you know, flat water, I can be super flat, big waves, I got to heel up a bit and be playing the main a ton. I can't pinch, can't feather. And then this is sort of medium. I'm, playing the main a bunch. I can't feather all the way, but I can feather quite a bit.
Right.
Because there's clearly some waves here, but they're nothing like they were at midwinters.
Yep.
So just on both of these photos here in this freeze, you had said that, sort of your middle has the jib in their hand. Who has the bang in their hand at this point? Another question from the chat here.
My
Who do you have?
My middle plays my vang and the jib sheet, and that's the, I always say that's the throttle when I need to depower. It's, kind of in a rotation. We hike hard, then we pull the vang on, and then we ease the vang off, and then we stop hiking. We never stop hiking with the vang on. So.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So what's the, well, actually, we're going to get into the mechanism of why that works in a second too. But yeah, the middle for us too plays the vang, and you can see how bent that boom is. He actually, this is John Baker, and he eases it in attacks, and so does Dan. If you're going to bend the boom that much, you don't want to have it on as you're going through attack. But yes, the middle does both the jib sheet and the vang, and then on the proctor mains, typically the middle does the traveler. So I wanted to talk a little bit about sail shape and the reason we're bending the mast with both the pre-bend, shims we use, and also the boom vang. Just as sort of a quick reminder that the sail is made up of luff curve and broad seam. So this is broad seam, where you basically take a flat edge of one panel of sail cloth, and then the one that matches up to it has some shape cut into it. With the draft in the right place and the depth, and then each panel's goes flat edge against curved, and that makes shape in the sail, and that shape is kind of there it's there forever. We can't really do much with that shape. It's built into the sail. And then the other kind is luff curve, and this is playing with the mast. I picked this fin sail just to make a point. This guy probably got about a foot of luff curve. And when you put that against a straight mast, it pushes a lot of material into the sail and creates shape, mostly toward the front of the sail. And then when you bend the mast, it flattens the sail. So we're trying to bend the mast when we need to depower, and then we're going to straighten the mast to power up. Mike Marshall, what's for a Thistle sail, what's kind of the range of luff curve we're talking about?
It's sort of somewhere between, you're looking at 4 to 6 inches is probably, depends what kind of luff curve, but yes, it's somewhere in that range. So 100 to 150 millimeters. So,
just to put it in perspective there, it's, it's probably half of this or so, maybe a little less than half of this, a third of this, what you see here. And it's, if you laid out your sail, it's a little bit hard to see because the bolt rope is also stretched. We put a scale on it and stretch it before we sew it on. So when you release it, it gets all those puckered wrinkles, and it makes it harder to see this. But if you took that bolt rope off, you would see, 4 to 6 inches of luff curve on your Thistle main. So, what we're trying to do is, if we want a straight mast, like on the top right here, it makes quite a bit of shape in the sail, and then when you bend it, it pulls the shape out of the sail.
So Mike, what are some telltale signs that you're looking for in your sail if it's, bending too much or not bending enough? Let's talk about not bending enough. I know with a fisher.
Yeah, so let's go back to this. Roughly speaking, if you bend the mast to meet the luff curve, as soon as you go past that, you start getting those overbend wrinkles. They're distortion wrinkles. We call them, so that's what we kind of key things off of. So you're not going to, and that's different than these wrinkles you see here in this picture with that the bolt rope makes because we stretched it. They're the distortion wrinkles you see going toward the clue of about to the clue of the boom, and we'll show you some pictures of that in a minute. But the way we set up the mains on the Thistle is that we want a little bit more mast bend than there is luff curve all the time. So we always see some overbend wrinkles. And so this is Lloyd Kitchen and team. And you can see this is the Proctor main. They have overbend wrinkles from here. These are you can tell they're overbend wrinkles because they go down at an angle. They're really distortion wrinkles. So in this picture, you know, the window goes maybe halfway. I'd say halfway is right about here. So I would call these overbend wrinkles going about halfway back in the main.
Mm-hmm.
So for most sails, I would call that a good amount of overbend wrinkles when you want to depower. Mike, Mike Marshall, any other thoughts on this kind of overbend wrinkles versus the bend of the mast?
I think that's about accurate. I think about 50% of the main, and in terms of vertical profile, it really has to do with Cunningham, but it's, you know, those wrinkles shouldn't be going up more than about, you know, halfway up the mast, or in a single spreader rig to the spreaders, and a double spreader rig like the Thistle, it's, you know, somewhere probably halfway between the, you know, the bottom two sets of spreaders, I would say.
Yeah, and Mike, in our
Thistle,
use that visual,
So,
our telltale window as a sign of how high those wrinkles should go. So.
too straight, you're not going to see any overbend wrinkles at all. And
right.
I think when that happens, we got problems. You know, I think it's just too round in front of the sail, too full.
And those problems are actually stemming from the jib interaction and not even necessarily from the main. If the jib wasn't there, you'd be almost happy with it being too straight. But it's when you think about both of them.
Right. Yeah. You want it really flat, especially the bottom of the main where it's overlapping. Good point.
Right. Right.
But we do have a jib, so. So this is, you know, you can see how much overbend we have, how much bend we have here. So let's look at this. This must be, I'm thinking this must be Eugene also.
Eugene.
Yeah, must be a Nationals because we got the little flag on the back of the boat. But here, let me draw a line here. I'm not quite sure where the top of the mast is, but you can see quite a bit of mast bend. You know, maybe 5, 6, 7 inches, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
This is kind of the max that I like to see. I see, so to me, this is about the middle of the boom, right between the two windows on the Fisher main. And to me, halfway, you know, I see these distortions going here, you know, and the most, you know, the furthest back the distortions go are, you know, maybe halfway back in the main. I wouldn't want any more bend than this in any condition. I think I probably could have put Cunningham on too, and that would have, you know, made them a little less obvious. But
yeah, you've got some on, but it's not as high as it could have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to ask how vertically high are you looking for them?
This is pretty high.
Yeah,
I'm kind of surprised how high it goes. Like I'm kind of thinking that that's too much. That's too high. Like I think this is marginally too bent. You know, it's right on the edge. It was pretty windy. We were pretty fast, so I guess, but that was the max I would do right here.
Yeah. To answer your question, Mike, I like the telltale window as kind of a reference point of how high those wrinkles should go.
Yeah, and I'm definitely above that. I agree with that. When they start going above that, I think I'm kind of at the hairy edge of. Hey, risking jumping around here a little bit, I'm gonna kind of look at the front here. You know, I see slight scallops in my jib, and you know, the jib halyard is not stretched. And I find when I stretch it, even in a breeze, you'd think you just want a tighter and tighter halyard. The front of the jib gets kind of unstable. Do you get that, Paul? It goes kind of whap, 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 whap whenever you go through a wave or something.
Yeah, I mean, I like to see just a crow's foot off those snaps and not any tighter than that. But then, you know, I don't want it flopping around either. I don't want between the snaps.
Yeah, I would say this is a bit on the loose side. I probably should have been a tiny bit tighter this day.
Yeah, if you
but I'm not worried. When I see that, I don't worry about it. It seems fine when it's like that.
Yeah. I mean, like, go back to your previous picture. You can really get a good view of it. And, you know, we talked about a little bit of backwind, but you can really see how loose it is, and it's not too loose.
Yeah.
It's interesting. In every photo, it's been the same way, even in
Yeah,
even
look
in the
at
ones
Floyd's
before
is the
this.
same, right? Yep. What was the one you're talking? This one here you're
Yeah.
talking about. Yep, it's loose there.
Keep
You know,
going to see it
I just
again.
find when I make it tight, it just seems like the jib gets unstable in the front. So it seems a little counterintuitive. I end up getting rid of that 4-to-1 counter, that purchase you do for the fine tune. We don't even have one.
That's because you have Dan.
Well, Delia does it. We got Delia. She's the one that pulls it up. So.
Okay.
But so this is an example of too much. This was kind of by accident. We did something wrong when we rigged the boat, and so there you go. And it's just, if you think of the mast as 3 inches, this is 3, 6, 9. This is like 10 or 12 inches of bend.
Yeah.
And look how much the Overbend Wrinkles go all the way back. And it was super flat water. I knew something was wrong. As soon as I saw that, and I'm like, oh, but it's really windy, and it was a very windy day, but it was super flat water. You can see how the water doesn't even look windy because it's so flat. And I think this was at Berlin with Sarah Paisley, and and I was like, oh, we'll just try it then because it's flat water. We can have a super flat sail, and we were just super slow. It didn't work. So I thought that was an interesting experiment. So I think in any condition, you need some shape. Like you couldn't put up if it was really windy, a super flat sail, like you couldn't put up a piece of plywood, right? And boat wouldn't go.
Right.
There's a limit, and that's why you have that broad seam, because you always need some shape in it.
Mike, getting back to your conversation earlier about heel, I mean, you look at the, your center traveler there, trimmed in hard and feathering a little bit. You can tell by the front of the jib
Yeah.
a little bit, but again, sailing the boat flat in flat water, able to pull that off even with that main. You said you weren't very fast, but I'm sure you weren't very slow either.
No, but it just didn't have that get up and go. I think the symptom to me was I couldn't accelerate. Like I think once I got up to speed, it was okay. There just wasn't enough shape in the sail to, the plane couldn't take off, right? The flaps weren't down, and trying to take off with the flaps already trimmed out, it just was too flat.
I was familiar with that.
Mike, we got a question from the chat. What was it that actually was wrong?
We put it in. We had taken the shrouds off for some reason and stuck the pin back in the wrong hole, down one hole on one side or 2 holes on one side, and so it just compression bended the mast more. Pretty amazing though. Just 1 or 2 holes made such a huge difference.
This photo isn't even from side on, so it's even more bend than you drew that line as.
Yeah.
Probably true. Yeah, it's a good point. It was a lot. Like I kind of thought about it later and was like, wow, that's probably not good for my mast,
Yeah, that's a lot of for a fisher.
Cool.
Mike, before we move on, just for a second here, we've had a couple of questions about it. One from before here, which is just about jib leads. Do your jib leads fairly set? Are you moving them, in the breeze and the light? Is that sort of a set thing in this condition, or are you moving them?
So the most part, I don't move my jib leads at all. We have kind of a magic spot for them, and it's not for being lazy. We've tried them in a whole bunch of different spots, and you'd think that in lighter air and flat water, you'd bring them in, and then heavier and you pull it out. And whenever we do that, it doesn't work. Whenever we bring them out, you just kind of go low without going enough faster to make it worth it. My theory on that is that the jib sheet's pretty far from the jib lead, and that the tiniest little jib trim difference does that for you. Like you ease it out just a little bit to open the top, it also goes out. And if it's a flat water and nice breeze and you pull in the top, it comes in quite a bit down low. So it kind of happens automatically. The distance of the clue in and out happens with the jib seat so well that moving the jib leads doesn't seem to work. But I know some people do other things. Like Paul, don't you move them out or put barber haulers on sometimes?
Yeah, so I have barber haulers, and so if I ever get into big waves, windy condition, I may pull a barber hauler on and put it on for maybe 2 inches. Just pulls the lead out just a little bit. But I'm with you as far as the blocks on the thwart. They're in a fixed spot, and like you said, the 1 inch of sheet tension really changes the jib a lot. So
I would go so far as to say just a couple clicks makes a huge difference. Like, it's amazing how much a tiny move, you know, 1/8 of an inch down at the bottom on the sheet, you can see a huge difference up by the spreader at that gap, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's the only thing I do with barber haulers, upwind.
Yeah. So I've experimented with them. I never really feel it's in the faster in the end. It feels like it should be. Like, every time I put them on, I have them, and I was like, oh, this should be much better. Especially like Midwinter's East was a good example. You know, we were pretty quick in the waves, and you know, I tried it with and without, and I really couldn't tell the difference in speed.
Yeah.
It's not a game changer, that's for sure. It's nothing like making sure you're trimmed right, or making sure this mass bend's right, making sure you're flat.
Right.
So speaking of overbend, you guys have been working on this DSD main, right? And Mike's been helping you with the design. And so you guys played around with the luff curve, right?
Yeah, so this was version 1 after when D-Ball and North combined, and Mike took all those files, and he could explain that a little bit better, but took all those files from Skip and put them into the North system, and this is the first sail that was produced, and I showed up at Fort Walton Nationals, and the sail was super smooth, but you know, I noticed that there was a little bit of overbend wrinkle when I trimmed in really hard, started bending the mast. I could definitely flatten the main a little bit too much, and so that started the progression of trying to add some shape back into the sail, and a lot of conversations with Mike, and a little tweak here, a little tweak there, and then we are where we are today, which is brand new sail. It's awesome.
Yeah. So here's kind of the after look, right? It's just
Yeah.
you can see a pretty big difference in where the overbend wrinkles go. Yeah.
Mike.
So so Mike Marshall, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing on it was in the conversations with Paul, as you can see in that previous photo, it really is, it really was aimed around fixing specifically those overbend wrinkles. And this question comes up a ton, and you guys can speak to it too as well. But why do you want overbend wrinkles, and why are they so important? And really, if we were to break them down into what they are, they're an indicator of how flat the sail is in that section. So as you had mentioned before, where the overlap with the jib is, you want the sail to be fairly flat. So you're looking for there to be overbend wrinkles in that area. And, in this case, when they go too far back, the sail is just getting too much shape pulled out of it. You don't have enough leech engaged. You don't have the leech engaged enough. You don't have and you're going to be able to go fast, but you're not going to go upwind, or you're going to be able to go point higher, but you're going to be slow. So you don't really have the range of modes. So ideally what Paul was trying, and what the development was looking for here was, really trying to make it so that, those overbend wrinkles were balanced, and there was not too much, but not too little depth in the front of the sail. And it took iterations and some tweaks, and, but in the end of it, you can see that the difference in those two photos. But bouncing that question back to you guys, Paul, when you sail with a sail, how do you feel that it's different to the Proctor sail? Same with Mike, and then are you using Traveler and Bang, or very similar, differently or similar to the other sails when you're trimming the sail?
I'm not trimming the sail any differently, compared to version 1 versus version 2. Just my personal experience is that I've always been fast in breeze, and the top of the sail, the middle of the sail was always excellent. I always felt like as the breeze lightened up a little bit, I was searching for power off the starting line, out of tacks, and I just wanted a little extra, shape in the sail down low to give me that punch. And so in talking with you and trying to, come up and have that fix, I didn't want to distort the sail and make any big changes because my speed in, 10 knots plus was outstanding. But I just really wanted to improve that 6 knot to 8 knot breeze.
I think this is sort of, kind of putting this back to everybody sailing. Those are the symptoms. If you're kind of wondering if you have too much mass bend, there's a couple things to look at. One is these overbend wrinkles. If they're going too far back on your main, it's too flat. If you have none, it's too full, and you want to change your mass bend accordingly. But also there's some of the feel things that Paul was just talking about, and what I felt when I had that mast way overbent. And that is that, if you feel like you can't accelerate, you can't change modes, it may be that your sail is too flat. And if you feel really bound up, you can point, but you can't go forward, your sail might be too full. Those are kind of the symptoms I see.
Yeah, I shim with this. I have a shaved step, and I shimmed in front of the mast. And there were times when I was testing that we would just cram shims in front to see how straight we could get the mast and what the sail would look like. But Mike mentioned the leech and the hook. We never could get the back end of the sail to look right doing that. So the little bit of change we made in the luff curve seemed to help the back end of the main as well.
Yeah, so maybe we should sort of explain that for a second. If you bend the mast too much, what happens is, besides these overbend wrinkles, it also opens the leech. It essentially makes the distance from the top of the mast to the end of the boom less, so that there's less, the material kind of hangs out there, so it opens it up. So if your mast ends up too straight, it might end up too hooked, and then if your mast is bent too much, your leech is too open and you won't be able to point. So once again, if your symptom is you can't point, kind of think about maybe your sail is too flat, your mast is too bent. And if you feel like you can point, but you're just going really slow when you do it, and you try to put your bow down and get moving, and you just stall out, kind of think maybe one thing to look at is your mast maybe too straight.
Yeah, look at the new, go to the new sail, Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just a lot different.
Yeah. Cool. Let's talk about this boom a little bit more. So this is once again Eugene, Oregon, and I kind of was surprised myself how tight my outhaul was and how bent my boom was, and just putting that red line there really shows. Oops, I'm not sure what just happened there. Putting that red line there really shows how bent that boom is, and what that's doing is it's jamming the boom into the mast and helping it bend. So we're getting mast bend from, the shape of the mast step and the shims. So in this picture, I think I had 2 shims in, and then I would crank on the vang to bend it more by jamming, ramming the mast into the boom into the mast. I'm kind of wondering if maybe the outhaul was a tiny bit too tight here. Do you have any thoughts on this picture, Paul?
Is there a point at which we're pulling the thing on too hard? I mean, as far as the boom overbending and now the leech is opening up too much, or you're gonna play that obviously with the vang, but.
Well, I think because it bends so much, you don't, once you pull the vang on a bit, it tightens the leech, and you put on more, and it doesn't tighten the leech a whole lot more. I think because the geometry of that's so far forward compared to the end of the boom, right? That's a big lever arm.
Yep.
I really think more of what you're doing is jamming it into the mast than messing with the leech. I think the leech is kind of being controlled by your main sheet. That's kind of my thought. I think there is a limit to how much you can put it on, and I think we're there. And I think it's in this picture.
Well, you mentioned main sheet, and in this picture right here, you're heeled up a little bit more than some other pictures. How are you balancing the boat when you have all this vang on? What are you doing from this point on to control that helm and the heel of the boat?
Well, yeah. So that's a great question. So once you get to the point that I got the Overbend Wrinkles, you know, farther back than I probably want, right? Like it's windy here and I'm trying to depower and I got them back really far. You know, that's already past that between the windows that I kind of my max point. We're already there. I got the fang on super tight. That's why it's like that. I got the out haul super tight. And so then you got to do something else to keep it flat, right? And it's either there's only two things left. You either pinch or you ease, or a combination of the two. So yeah, you're right. I'm heeled more than I like to right here. I'm not quite sure why. But you know, I should have been pinching up a little more, feathering, or I should have eased the main a little bit.
Yeah.
So if we're talking about that and actually getting the main flat enough to be able to go upwind, you guys spoke about shims. What, you know, give us a little bit more detail about, you know, what you're doing with the shims, how big are they, you know, in front versus behind the mast step. What are you guys looking for there?
Well, I can start with that as, you know, I think the fisherman likes quite a bit of pre-bend or more than most. So I look for about 1.25 inches on land of bend in the mast with one shim in. And these shims, you're allowed 3/16 of shim. So I carry around 3 1/16 shims. And coincidentally, the little tangs on your mast that hold the diamonds, these things right here, you know, that hold they happen to be 1/16. So I got mine all from a busted mast. Kind of flattened them out. They had a little curve to them. So, you know, so I start with 1, and then it gets windy like this. I go to 2 or maybe even 3. But I gauge that by these overbend wrinkles. If I feel like I'm overpowered, I'll stick one in until I get the overbend wrinkles to about here, and that's it. Then I don't put any more in. So I rarely go to 3.
And you have a flat step, don't you, Mike?
Nope, I got a tapered step.
Okay.
And because there's a gap in front, it allows it to be dynamic. So when you put the vang on, for example, it's still got even further to go if you want to. So you can use the vang as a depower tool because it's got, you know, the bass can bend easily because of that gap in front.
Right.
And I think it's
what do you do?
What Paul was saying. Sorry, what Paul was saying, which is that he puts it in to restrict bend. He puts it in front because when you put the vang on at times, you know, or at least in the early iterations of the sail, he was putting it in to restrict bend, which by putting it in the front, it would stop the mast from compressing into that gap. And so it would stop that lower mast bend from the vang.
Correct. And I'll also say, being a little bit OCD, I have a shaved step as well, taper step, and I really worked on the mast butt casting and the deck casting, the step, to I call marry or the shape of them so they rock very evenly together. And I have a lot of mast bender. I can really bend my mast if I want to with the vang. And I just, again, with that sail, like Mike was saying, I needed shims to do that. There are times that, you know, I want to really flatten the main and I'll take the shims out. I never have to shim in the back. That's, you know, again, using the DSD. If I had a fisher main, I may have to. It'll just to see how it sets up. But
yeah, and I think that's because, you know, the fisher main, I believe, has some more luff curve than the DSD, and the Proctor's probably another iteration, even a little less luff curve than that. So the Proctor, you shim in front as well to keep it from bending. It's very easy to overbend the Proctor main, bend the mast too much and get the overbend wrinkles way too far back.
And do you guys ever have trouble keeping the shims in and not falling out when you take bang on and off? If they're in front specifically?
Mine have a piece of shot cord through them and it just pops right in and they stay in place, never fall out.
So does your shot cord like kind of hold it down? Is that one on each side to hold it down?
Yeah, it holds it down and back. So, and if I don't want them, I can pop them forward and then they just sit in front of the mast step. And if I want them, I can just pop them in. Obviously, you know, before the race.
So you have two holes in your shim, one on each side, so you can do that?
Right. Yeah.
That's a good idea because I've seen, you know, I used the Proctor main for a little while when I was sailing with Blair Dryden. That's what he had, and and same with Kyle Finnerfrock. And, you know, I immediately put shims in front, but we always had to tape them in, and I never liked that. So I really like the idea of having your shock cord, Paul. It's a great idea.
Yeah. Take a picture.
You know, the other thing I noticed in this photo is, you know, I do think that for some reason all these Eugene, Oregon ones, we're not pulling the Cunningham on enough. You know, to me that, yeah, sure, we can get the Overbend Wrinkles still. You're not trying to pull them out so much but this is just way too loose. I think, we should add Cunningham on.
Remember, Mike, Eugene, Oregon, the wind would come through in waves. And so a lot of times you probably would get hit with big gust, and then that would go for 4, 5, 6 minutes, and then all of a sudden it would lighten up 5 knots. And so in those lulls, you're probably okay with your Cunningham where it is.
Well, I mean, maybe that's just reflecting my priorities too. You know, what I care about most is the overbend and playing the vang and the main sheet and steering correctly. And to me, the Cunningham, yeah, it makes a difference, but it's a pretty minor difference compared to those things. So I was probably more focused on just those big lines instead of worrying about the Cunningham.
All
right. From someone who didn't sail the event, was it wavy or not there?
Well, it wasn't like Midwinter's West this year, but it wasn't like, you know, Mission Bay and San Diego either. It wasn't super flat. It started off a little choppy at the bottom, and then toward the top it got pretty flat, right, Paul?
Yeah, and shifty and flat at the top. You know, I mean, for as windy as it got, it wasn't that wavy.
Yeah, it was a short fetch because the weather mark was almost to shore, so you really only had the 1.25 mile feet plus a little bit of waves. But the bottom, you round the leeward mark, and it was choppy for the first half of the leg. It was a bit choppy, but it wasn't. I would call it a you know, not a flat venue, but it had a little bit of chop.
So in theory, that could be why you're sailing with a little less Cunningham on. You're happy to have the leech of the main engaged a little bit more and not be pulling the draft forward as hard because you don't have to get the bow down as much. So in theory, that could be a little bit of
definitely a feathering venue. Was a little bit more, unlike Midwinter's East this year, which was a footing venue.
Right, where engaging the leech of the main is key.
Right. Absolutely.
Great.
All right. So we had a question on double-handed sailing. And, you know, with everything going on, you know, some people are sailing 2 up that didn't used to, and you're sailing pretty light. And so the question was, what should you do? And, you know, my thought is the same thing you do triple-handed, just sooner.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, you have to, the Thistle's so powered up. So when you're sailing light, you're going to have to depower everything. And, you know, in this particular photo, we're going to need more outhaul. We need vang, we need Cunningham, and a little bit of hiking doesn't hurt.
I also think it's flat water. They could probably feather it too. But, you know, I sailed the Thistle Nationals with Delia and my kid Sam, and we were 420 pounds or something in North Cape, which is pretty light. And we had a heavy air day. And, you know, it seems to me you know, the only difference we did is we just got to the 2 or 3 shims and got the tight vang and all that. We got there at 10 knots instead of 13. And if you're double hand, you're probably going to get there at 8 instead of 13. So I think that's all you do is you just go up the scale quicker, but you don't do anything else different.
Yep. Completely agree.
Besides boat handling, of course. But as far as sailing fast, you still want to be, the temptation is to heel up because you don't have the same rotating moment. And that's what you don't want to do. You want to still keep the boat flat somehow.
Yeah, to ease the main out to do that.
Right.
So go ahead, Mike.
Oh, I was going to say the big thing here, I think, is they should have cranked the vang. And I don't mind the traveler down a little. I think that's good. But I think if the boom is super straight, right? So they're not, unlike my photo a couple photos ago, or this one. And look at the boom bent there compared to here. They're overpowered. It's just not as windy, but they're light. So the first thing you should do is put that vang on, bend the mast.
So 2 related questions to this, but also related to the 3-person sailing normally. We had a question from the chat about engaging the leech. When we use that phrase, I know sort of both of us used it, engaging the leech of the main. If you guys could talk to that a little bit more. I know how I would describe it, but if you guys could talk to what you're trying to do there when you're in one of those, flatter condition venues where you're trying to keep the bow up. What's the goal there, and what is engaging the leech mean?
You want to take that one, Paul?
Yeah, well, I mean, so in order for the boat to go upwind, we have to have the back of the main working. And I always use the rule of thumb that, I can have a little bubble in the front of the main, but I want my battens working. And so if we're talking about jib trim, if the jib is over trimmed and you're, washing the main out and it's flapping, then the leech of the main's not working. So it's hard to sail upwind. And so if we can have the sails balanced and you can ease the main and keep the boat flat, but keep the back of the main working, you're going to be able to go upwind, a lot better.
Yeah, so anybody that's done clinics with us, we always talk about, in lighter air, when you're underpowered, that you're trimming to the top leech telltale. And it's really critical. Even just a couple of clicks makes a difference. And I always look at it as, there's a lot of different ways to look at it, but one way to look at it is, I'm pointing off the leech. If I trim in, if we're trimmed in all the way because we're not overpowered, and we trim in a little more, we're going to point a little higher. We ease just a little, we're going to foot a little more. You're kind of pointing off the leech to the main. And, the same thing, it works a little differently, but it's the same idea in a breeze, is if you don't have any leech, it's really hard to go anywhere. Even if it's crazy wind, it's blowing 35, I want to look up and see my batten still engaged with the wind, kind of like Paul was saying. And if not, you're just going to kind of reach around. You're not going to be able to go upwind.
Yeah, and from a perspective of what does that actually mean, it's engaging the rudder. So if you have, trying it back to the rudder that we talked about earlier, if you have a lot of helm, it's because the leech of the main is pulling down on the back of the boat, pushing the bow up. So you're fighting it too much, and you're going to feel a lot of that, windward helm trying to turn the bow up, and you're going to have to pull the helm towards you. And if you have the main not engaged enough, the helm's neutral or, terrible lee helm, and that's where trimming in the main a little bit more, forcing the bow to want the balance of the boat to push the bow up. That's what that's what how it relates back to the tiller.
Yeah, so like that's a really good point, Mike. And I think like the way you'll feel that is if in super heavy air or just being overpowered, like these guys are now. If they had the jib in super tight, they have the jib eased, so the main's eased also to match it, which is the right thing to do. But if suppose they had the jib super tight, the main would probably be luffing right here. And if that was true, then they'd be pushing on the helm because the jib wanted to pull the bow down. So, if you're feathering the jib and your main's luffing, you need something in the back of the boat to balance things out. That's kind of what you're talking about, right, Mike?
Exactly. It is that leech of the main is really driving your pointing ability. What about the leech of the jib? Can either of you guys touch on that leech telltale on the upper leech of the jib? Are you guys using that in this condition or just in the lighter condition? Anything to glean from that?
My thought is, go ahead, Paul. What?
Yeah, I always use it, Mike. I want to make sure that the slot is open. And so if I start easing my main out to keep the boat flat and that jib telltale stalls on the leech, I'm going to have to ease my jib out to match, because I don't want to shut the door between the two sails.
Yeah, so I think it's really critical to get that leech telltale flowing in lighter air when you're underpowered, kind of like you're looking at the leech of the main in lighter air. You're looking at both leeches, and you're looking at the leech telltale on the top batten of the main, and you're looking at the leech telltale, kind of above the window there on the jib, and you want them both flowing a certain amount. And the jib, you want your jib as tight as you can get it without it stalling in that condition. And then you'll find though, as you start getting overpowered and you ease the main, it'll stall that jib again. And just like Paul mentioned, you have to ease it. So that's a really good indicator. I find also as soon as that happens, you're seeing backwind anyway. So as soon as I see backwind, I crack the jib a little bit too. think we talked about that before. But I'm looking for just a subtle bubble up front with backwind, and that's kind of when the telltale is perfect.
Hey, Mike Marshall, from a designer point of view, I think, I don't know if I heard this from you or Mike Ingham in the past, but the wind sees, you know, we see two sails, but the wind doesn't see two sails, right? You have the front end or the jib and the back end of the main. And our goal is to get the air to pass through the sails and exit without as much disturbance and drag, correct?
Right. In theory, the main sees, well, the jib doesn't know that the main's there unless there's an interaction between the two of them, which is when you get that bubble on the back of the main and you get the interference between them. I mean, when it's too closed, you get a little bit of air that, if you get air that comes off of the jib, hits the main and comes back and hits the jib, that's when it's too close. That's a huge amount of drag. And which is why we see just a little bit of bubble sometimes, and that's okay. But if we see too much bubble or the main luffing, that's when the interaction is no longer good. But what the goal is, the jib being there helps to accelerate the air across the backside of the main, which inherently makes the low pressure on the front of the main better and drives the boat forward better.
Cool.
Yeah. Well, guys, any other questions from the chat room, Mike, that we didn't answer? I know we got a bunch before the event too.
Yeah, I think we've gotten through most, if not all of them. So I think we're going pretty well here. And of course, if there's others, if anyone has any others, I'm sure they're more than welcome to email anytime, any of us, and reach out and ask. But I'm sure you're going to cover that.
Right. Well, besides the DSD plus main, now Mike, Paul, that's available now, right? That is the new production main, correct?
Yep. We just launched it, so it's available for this coming fall selling season.
Perfect. And so just for a quick note on that, it starts September 1st and goes through mid-October. So contact any of us if you wanna order some sales, and feel free to contact us about anything. You can, questions on speed or whatever. We're more than happy to help. So,
yeah.
So any last questions from anybody?
I did have one on the wrinkles on that main, which were the overbend wrinkles we were talking about, one that just came in.
On this main or on a previous one?
I think it was referring to that main.
Okay.
The overbend wrinkles on that main. And
Yeah.
just what we were looking at there.
Question?
And no, but I think it was just speaking to the wrinkles. And what I think the discussion here is, we're hoping for this sail to potentially be a little bit flatter and get the boat flatter, but you're already seeing the overbend wrinkles. So I think that's a combination of Cunningham. Adding Cunningham is going to get those wrinkles to go away. Adding Bang is going to bring them back a little bit more. And so it's just increasing that balance and helping the sails that way.
Actually, I like this question because there's a couple of interesting things going on. If I look at these overbend, it's really hard to tell because we're not looking from the side. We're looking, from the leeward quarter. But these these overbend wrinkles, I mean, I don't know how much of these are even overbend wrinkles. They're not really the ones radiating down, right? Like I see overbend wrinkles go like this, right? Like you'd see them at some angle like this. These are more just I think the Cunningham's just super loose here.
I mean, look at
the top. I think there's very little mass bend down low here. Yeah. And I think that must be a combination of some shims or, there's no vang on. I think the vang makes such a huge difference with that. So like Mike Marshall said, that I think you'd see overbend wrinkles. But I think a lot of these aren't overbend wrinkles. I do think it's kind of interesting that this is an overbend wrinkle all the way up here. So there's a little bend up here. And I don't see that on my sail, so I'm not quite sure why that is in there. The top's bent for some reason.
On that bombshell.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not sure though. It's a kind of it's just hard to tell from this angle, but my guess is that these are more, since they're straight back, they're more just the luff, that bolt rope we were talking about. We stretch it, sew it, and then when you release it, it puts these wrinkles in.
Yeah, I think Cunningham for sure there.
yeah, cutting will help that. But I think probably the real big picture here is that, you know, we got to figure out how to bend this bottom of this mast, either with shims or vang. That's what I'd be looking to do.
Mhm.
Cool.
All right.
Well, we were trying to keep this under hours, and we did that. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thanks everybody. We saw 70 people. Who picked 70?
I did. No, I didn't. I think that was Laura, right? So very good.
Yeah.
Yeah, good turnout.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for coming, everybody.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Mike Marshall.
Thank you.
All right, guys. See ya.
All righty.